Well, good morning. I think it's time we go ahead and get started here. How's everybody?
Good.
Good. You have found yourself in the 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, maybe a little Jude. And if we get done with all of that, we'll just go ahead and go into Revelation. I mean, why not? Just knock it all out. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Appreciate you all being here this morning. I think you're going to find 1 Peter has a pretty extra special significance for us today. Why are we going to study this book? Why are we going to open it up? What's it mean to us? I think you're going to find it's going to scream to us. These people were getting ready to face some pretty significant persecution. Some pretty brutal persecution. A few days, a few class periods, we'll look at a couple of examples of some of the stuff that they went through. It was very difficult times. And Peter's coming to these people and he's saying, what are you going to do? What kind of people are you going to be? How are you going to live? How are you going to function in this environment? Are you going to stay faithful to the Lord? Are you going to be faithful to your brothers and sisters? Are you going to be faithful to your spouses? What kind of people are you going to be? How are you going to function during this time? What's that mean for us today? What are we thinking? We continually live in a less moral world. We continually live in a place where there is less God, less Bible being read, less these types of things. How are we going to live? How are we going to respond to that? What kind of people are we going to be? It might be a little different than you might expect. Peter brings out that picture for us here. I'm going to go ahead and ask Brad, if you will, to release in a word of prayer real quick.
Heavenly Father God, we're so thankful for this day, this opportunity we have to come together to worship you, Lord, to learn more about what you would have us be, what you would expect from us. And you would Darron lead us in this study. And you would take some practical applications away from today and then every class we're going to discuss this quarter, Lord willing. Be with all the other teachers as they engage and lead the minds of everyone here. Pray that we will do things in the right way, do things that are pleasing to you. Be with those who can't be with us for whatever reason, for sickness or spiritual reasons. Pray that they can come back to us soon. Always thankful for your Son, who did for us on the cross, Lord. Christ's name we pray.
Amen. Thank you. So I've certainly got some introductory remarks, kind of the stuff you dig into when you first open up a new lesson, a new study, or whatever. But before we get into those, I just want to get into the Word. So I want us to read just the first 3 verses of 1 Peter chapter 1. So if you would, open up your Bibles. Oh, before we get into that, anybody not have a book? Everybody have a book? Just kind of the thoughts on the book. We will loosely be following that, certainly getting some information out of it. But if you follow along in that, you'll definitely be up with the class, and we'll be looking at some of the questions in the book. So appreciate you all getting those and being prepared with them. Before we get into some of the introductory remarks that we want to see about Peter and about this word, somebody would just read the first 3 verses of 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter 1 through 3.
Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of God, the Father, through sanctification of the Spirit, unto obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ. Grace unto you and peace be multiplied. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead.
So good news is there's not a lot there, really. I mean, when you break that down, it really doesn't break out into anything solid. It doesn't say anything controversial, especially using the word elect there in verse 2. Nothing big, nothing to talk about. So when we get there, we should just roll right through that. Of course not. There's a lot there. Very significant opening that Peter opens with. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about Peter himself. Who is this man? And from your study, how did he get his name? How did Peter get his name, and what does that mean? What do y'all see in there? Well, Somebody,
Simon or Jonah.
Oh.
That's kind of, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I kind of wish we named your kids like that today. That'd be kind of cool.
okay.
Son of, I like that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, very true. Simon Bar Jonah. It means Simon the son of Jonah. That's in Matthew 16:17. It says there, and Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." So yes, you're exactly right. That means Simon, the son of Jonah. We also have reference to this name Cephas. If you want to turn over to John 1 and verse 42. John chapter 1 and verse 42. Somebody would read that real quick.
Drawing him to Jesus, Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which means Peter.
Okay. Yeah, so Cephas means Peter, so we have that word there. What does the word Peter mean? What does the Greek word for Peter?
My Bible has in parentheses, which is translated a stone.
Okay, a stone, yeah. I think the Greek word is Petros, and that certainly means stone, rock, ledge, cliff. Why does Peter have this name? What is significant in being called a stone or a rock or a ledge? What do we know about Peter?
His character.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to his character. Absolutely. The notes I have was, his soul was unyielding. He resembled a rock. I mean, he was a rock of the Christian faith. He was a very strong leader. And Peter was very involved. Obviously an apostle. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this was his character. He was very strong personality, very strong leader. And he was given this name, hey, you are a rock, you're a stone, you're a cliff. And he remained loyal to the Lord to the very end. And I know we certainly have the story where he denied Christ, but really other than that, he was a stalwart for the cause.
Kind of also like Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, that Jesus knows. He's been through all this stuff, but he knows our character. I mean, he knew Simon.
Absolutely.
Let's just call you Cephas. Speaking to his character, I mean, he knew.
Right.
He knew.
Absolutely.
I mean, Peter had some choices to make himself, but Jesus knew his character.
Right. So, I want to look at just a few, but what are some of the characteristics of Peter? And what are some examples of these characteristics that you've read about Peter in the past? What do you know about Peter? When you think Peter, what are the characteristics that this man had?
He was quick to act.
He was quick to act.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
it caused an issue because of it.
Sometimes it did cause an issue. Absolutely. He was very quick to act. Absolutely. Example I have of that, let's turn over to Matthew 14. If somebody would read 24 through 31. Matthew 14, 24 through 31.
But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter went out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?"
Okay, so we have Peter here on the boat. There's more than one person on this boat, but who was the first one to get up and walk on the water? There's Peter. Quick to act, impulsive, not always thinking things through, not always knowing what's going on there, but he certainly did that.
You might note there that Christ wasn't on the walk on water. Peter did, maybe not very long, but he took a step or two.
He absolutely did. Yeah, absolutely. Very
I don't know how, I know this is, I understand, I know there's 3 to 6 o'clock time frame, that fourth watch. But I know the PM part. I mean, 3, I don't know how alert, coherent I'm gonna be at 3 to 6 in the morning. Out on the water and to see this happen. But he's zealous. I mean, he just see something, he understood the urgency and he went.
Correct.
I mean, that's also one of the parables of Jesus, the sower. I mean, his seed was planted and man, it sprung up, he's all kinds of energy, but then all these waves and the sun beat down and he sank.
Right.
So that's just hard to. I can barely get up and make the bathroom with that early in the morning if I got to get up and go. And to have the energy and the understanding to see this Jesus and the faith just jump out, man, that's something. That's something.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you. What else about Peter? What else you see in Peter in the life he lived? Well, I certainly see that he was inquisitive. Look at Matthew chapter 15. We're not going to read this whole story. But Jesus here, he's telling this parable, and he's talking to the Pharisees about their traditions and all of this, and I think it's kind of confusing. We don't really understand what's going on. But somebody read verse 15. Matthew 15, verse 15.
Then Peter answered and said to him, "Explain this parable to us."
Yeah, so Peter here, he's inquisitive. He's the one that's going to ask the question. He's going to ask the meaning of the parable. Here's this parable. We're all kind of struggling with what does this mean? What's going on here? And Peter's the one that's going to speak up, and he's going to ask the question of what's going on. I think you see another example of that over in chapter 16 of Matthew. Somebody read verses 13 through 16.
Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, others Jeremiah, and one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God."
Once again, here's Peter, very first to speak. Such eagerness. I'm ready to speak. I'm ready to go. I'm the first one that's going to speak up. I'm the first one you're going to hear my voice. And that is what we see in Peter. Matthew 16 and verse 22. So on down there, same chapter, verse 22. It says, "And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Peter was this individual. He had these strong preconceived notions. Jesus is going through the process here. He's foretelling his death. This is what's going to happen to me. He's like, this is not going to happen to you, Lord. I know you. This is not going to happen. He just had in his mind these strong opinions and strong words that he knew. Matthew 17, 1 through 5. Somebody don't care to read that. Matthew 17, 1 through 5.
Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud, saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him."
So what do you see about Peter here? He's ready to jump in again, right? He's just ready to, let's build these tabernacles. Let's build this up. Let's get on with it. Let's do this stuff. Of course, that didn't end up happening, but Peter, he's just ready to go, ready to jump in, ready to be the first one, ready to do it. John 13. John 13, verses 1 through 9. Someone don't care to read that. 13, 1 through 9.
Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head.
Classic Peter here. You know, you're not going to wash my feet, Lord. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to do that. Well, if I don't wash your feet, then you're not going to have any part of it. Wash it all. Just the whole thing. Just do it all. We're going to wash my whole body. Just the whole thing. I'm here. Such a great attitude. I mean, he obviously didn't have an understanding. I get that. He didn't know what was going on. But man, what an attitude. Just, I'm here. Let's do it. So much to learn from that attitude. John 20, verses 6 and 7.
And Simon Peter came, following him, and went to the tomb. He saw the linen clothes lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with linen cloth, but put in his place by itself.
I'm sorry. Go ahead and read verse 8 too, if you don't care.
Okay. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went and saw it and believed.
So what do you see there about Peter?
He's a 4-star recruit. John beat him to the tomb. So he's a little slow.
Okay. But who was the first one in?
John was.
Was it John?
Yeah, John outran him.
Outran is at verse 5, John didn't go in,
My bad.
but he did not go in. Did you go again?
Yeah, and it says in 6, then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I may have messed up that example. Sorry about that. I thought the example there was that Peter went in first, but I don't think he did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Good. Okay, so John got there first.
John got there first and stopped. Peter following, and then
Peter's
Peter
on
went in.
C.
Absolutely. So, okay, so I got off track there. That was my point. Peter went in first. Yeah, even though he didn't get there first, he went in first. Absolutely. Good. Thank you all for why I have you here, clarifying things like that. Thank you. Matthew 26, verse 33. So I've got 3 verses here, just real quick, about kind of the last point of Peter. Peter was a rock. Peter stayed loyal to the Lord and to the end. Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Luke 22, 33 and 34. Peter said to him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. And I know Peter denied the Lord. We know that story and what happened there. But he was certainly headstrong. He was certainly, I'm going to be with the Lord. I'm going to follow him. And even though he went through that issue, he certainly remained loyal to the Lord. One more, Mark 14 and verse 29. Once again, Peter said to him, even though they all fall away, I will not. Peter was, he was not offended by Christ. He was certainly impulsive. He didn't know, he didn't know what these words meant, that he was going to follow Christ to the end. And because of that, he certainly went through a time there where he struggled with that, but with all accounts, we know that Peter stayed past that. He stayed loyal to the Lord, faithful to the work. He was certainly all the things we talked about. He was impulsive. He was inquisitive. He did things and said things that he didn't fully understand. But I think the example for us all is that be ready to go, be ready to follow the Lord to the end, no matter what comes. And I think Peter certainly shows that to us. Yes, sir, in the back.
I think Peter's evolution of faith is an important lesson for us all to understand that, it's not a switch that you flip, that you don't just one day wake up and, you have complete faith. It has to grow and it has to develop through learning, through understanding. Peter had faith in Jesus. And you see that in him walking on water. He had faith that Jesus could cause him to do that. He also had faith in the wind and the waves and the storm. He knew what they were capable of too. And he wasn't ready and able yet to understand that Jesus was in control of all of that. And when he denied Jesus 3 times, he had faith in Jesus still. He knew who Jesus was. He didn't understand what Jesus was doing. And he had faith in the Romans. He knew what the Romans could do. He knew what the people around him could do and what could happen if he was found to be one of his followers in that situation. And so he didn't understand what Jesus was doing. He wasn't totally there yet. But he was getting there. And he got there, very soon after. And that's why we see him running to the tomb and of course we know the life he led after that. So, it's a great example of how we shouldn't always, especially when we're starting out, beat ourselves up because, we fail. We have moments of doubt and fear and anxiety and whatever because it takes time to develop.
Absolutely. And what I think you see, and we'll get into this as the class goes on here in 1 Peter, is that you see the mature Peter. The writings that you see here in 1 Peter, of course, we're going to talk about this. He writes this shortly, really before his dad. So he's fully mature here. He has reached that maturity of his faith that John had just talked about. That the things that we're seeing here, we're kind of seeing that growth that he made during his life here on this earth. 1 Peter is kind of the end of that. We see this very mature Peter talking to these Christians who are getting ready to face this very difficult and troubling time, and the words and the wisdom that he's giving to them. That's what we're going to see here through these chapters.
I have a note here I've written that sums up Jonathan's thoughts there, at least in my mind. It's that faithfully flawed character, Peter, it's hopeful.
Right.
It's hopeful.
Absolutely. Very hopeful. Yep.
Another thing I don't think we talked about that shows his nature is in Matthew 28 or 26:50 and also John 18:10, where when they come to take Christ, Peter was the first one to grab his sword out and chop off somebody's ear and act of defiance of the Romans and the Jews that were going to try Christ. And then just, I guess a few hours later, he would turn around and deny him,
Right.
But that's another attribute we see of Peter.
I mean, it's probably fair to say that he wasn't aiming for his ear, right? I mean,
He might have missed.
he's willing to make some pretty harsh actions.
Right.
For Christ.
Uh-huh.
But then a few moments later, he's running for his life too, hiding.
Right. Yep. For sure. Sure. Great point.
Yeah, I picture that scene as Peter attempting to be Eddie, and it just, through the actions and him maybe ducking, trying to avoid where his ear got cut off, but I don't think that's Peter's intention
Right.
at all. Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
Well, the sword might have had some problems with God.
Yeah. But when you look at Peter and we see Peter, he's an apostle of Jesus Christ. I mean, an apostle. But yet he's a human being. We see his flaws in his character and issues, and you spoke of, you know, his maturity, and we see that in his writings, but, you know, Peter didn't reach a level of maturity, in my opinion, until after the death of Christ. That's when it all came together for him. You know, and that's when I think Peter changed. I think that's where he just didn't suddenly jump into things anymore. He thought about things, and he understood the reason now for everything, and why things had to be done this way. And you know, that's when he became fully mature. I think as a Christian was at the death of Jesus. That's when he understood everything from him.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. That makes a lot of sense, for sure.
Well, there was some divine interference there too, I believe. He was chosen to preach the first sermon there to the Jews on Pentecost. And, how that all evolved, I don't know, but, I think he was chosen for the reason of the things that we've seen about his nature. He was man enough to stand up and do it and get on with it.
Correct. Yeah, there was certainly no hesitation, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
Wasn't Peter the one that Paul had to have a talk with?
There was a talk there at one point. Yeah, I think so, for sure. Yeah, Peter had to be straightened out from time to time. I think you're exactly
So
right.
had to be calmed down.
Yeah, calm down.
Calm
Yep,
down.
yep. So that leads us greatly into my next story. When me and Stacy were kind of going through this and studying about it, we were kind of thinking about a little bit about Maddie Sue. I feel like Maddie Sue has a few of these qualities, both good and bad. From time to time, she needs to be calmed down. But she certainly does not care to be the first and to talk a lot and all that kind of stuff. And story the other day, she was over at her friend's house, and there's our neighbor's house. She's got a little friend over there. Her friend came in all excited. May Sue, I was saved. I've been saved. And May Sue thought, this is the greatest thing ever. This is awesome. You've been baptized. This is awesome. Well, girl's like, well, I've not been baptized. Well, this blew May Sue's mind. Of course, she did not understand this. And she says, and I don't know the exact words, but it's something about, you need to be baptized to be saved, And of course, you can imagine that was not probably a very odd conversation. The thoughts I had were, my personality, if somebody came to me saying, Darron, I've been saved, I've not been baptized, I'm like, well, this is an opportunity for teaching. I'm probably not going to bring you down right here, right now, like Maddie Sue would. But sometimes I do wonder, man, what does God really want there? Does he want more than Maddie Sue? Like, we have to get the truth. Let's get to it now. Let's get it on. Let's not hesitate. We seem to just care about things that maybe we shouldn't be caring about. I don't know what the right answer is there. I obviously struggle with that. Maddie Sue obviously doesn't at her age.
What would Peter do?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about early Peter or late Peter? It's good question there.
God does, they become like children.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was interesting. Don't know if anybody has any comments on that, but certainly I think you can see that. Okay, moving on a little bit with Peter. What was his occupation? Peter was a Peter was a fisherman, and who was his partners? Who was his partners in those endeavors?
His brother Andrew and
Okay.
James and John.
Brother Andrew, and then James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Absolutely. And what do we know about Peter's early life? Before he kind of became an apostle, What was Peter up to? What was Peter doing? Where was he living? There's a couple of verses. One is in John 1:44. It says Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And so we know that he was living around the shores of Galilee. Bethsaida is it's kind of on the shores of Galilee, so obviously it makes sense that a fisherman was living in that area. The other place that we kind of see him is over in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 5. Says, when he had entered Capernaum, the centurion came forward to him, appealing to him. And then go on down to 14 and 15. It says that when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and began to serve him. So we see him also here in this town of Capernaum at his mother-in-law's house. So it seems like he spent a lot of time kind of in these two areas. This is also kind of interesting enough. One of the meetings that we see between Peter and Jesus before Peter became an apostle. I think that's one of the areas. Another one is in John 1. John chapter 1. If somebody don't care, read 35 through 42.
The next 35 through 42.
Please.
The next day after John stood and two of his disciples, and looking upon Jesus as he walked, he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. Then Jesus turned and saw them following, and said unto them, "What seek ye?" They said unto him, "Rabbi," which is to say, being interpreted, "Master, where dwellest thou?" And he said to them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he dwelt, and abode there with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. And one of the two which heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And he first found his own brother Simon, and said unto him, "We have found the Messiah," which is being interpreted, the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. And when Jesus beheld him, he said, "Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah, thou shalt be called Cephas," which is by interpretation a stone.
And so we see Andrew bringing Peter to meet Jesus and to see Jesus here. And then the last one, Luke 4:31. It says, and he went down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath. And so I think it's pretty safe to assume here that Peter probably heard Jesus speak here. Obviously, Jesus had come to the city to speak, and this is the city where Peter was residing and where he lived and where he was spending kind of his early life. And I think it's pretty obvious that he would have probably went out and seen Jesus there. One of the points that is brought out is that, Peter is pretty much considered an uneducated man. If you turn over to Acts chapter 4 and verse 13, when he is arrested and when he is before the Sanhedrin here, says there, "Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus." And so I think it's kind of an interesting point about Peter. He's very bold, he's very, very forward, very all those type of things, but he seems like largely, for the most part, he was very uneducated. Just a very common man, just a fisherman. And kind of interesting to keep that in mind as we see the life of Peter, and we end up going through this book of 1 Peter. And so then we get to Peter becomes an apostle. So Mark 3, verses 13 through 19. Somebody don't care if, don't care to read that. Mark 3:13 through 19.
He went up on the mountain and called to him those who himself wanted, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and to have power to heal sicknesses, and to cast out demons. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him, and they went into a house.
Okay. So I think Peter appears, I think it's either first, maybe second in all listings. Anytime there is a listing of the apostles, his name's right there at the top. His name's right there at the first. Why do we think that is? Why is he up there?
I mean, it's probably his body. I mean, he's there, and he's, like you said, he's by choice. I mean, he chooses to be there, and he's involved. He's invested in this whole process.
I think you're right. I think it is. I think it's a strong conviction. That's what you said. I think it's the leader.
It could likely indicate that, and I think you're just about to say it before I interrupt you, that he was the leader. He stepped out in front.
Absolutely.
And, likely some of the other apostles followed his lead.
Yeah, I think it is. It's his strong conviction. It's his leadership. He was always out in front. He was always doing those things. He was very convicted, very ready to go. And I think because of that, that's why you see his name at the top of all these listings.
Well, we read just a while ago that Jesus said, "You are Peter, on this rock I'll build my church." So Christ obviously do that. So having him out front, listening from
Absolutely.
make a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's I think that's it. Who was? I think the right way to say it is, what was Peter's main charge? Who was he told to go out and to preach to? Who was he appointed to talk to as an apostle? Who was he mainly after? Okay, Gentiles. I think so. I think see that. I think he certainly spoke to the Jews some as well, but certainly in 1 Peter, he's talking to mainly Gentiles there, and I think that was the charge and the people he ended up talking to the most.
Just another example here, when Christ surnames people, he's got their character in mind. I mean, these sons of thunder. I mean, another example where they wanted to, people that were just blaspheming, just God strike down lightning and kill them. I mean, you think you got a Peter at the house of Maddie? I think you might have got a couple of these at our house. I mean, just I mean, hey, they're all in too. They're convicted and they're energetic and wanting stuff, but they're a little bit more let's quick to the judgment type thing. And, they're rebuked on that later. So.
Very good. Yeah, I agree. So just to kind of summarize Peter a little bit, Peter was impulsive. Peter was impetuous. He was the outspoken apostle. He was the first apostle to perform a miracle after Pentecost. It would make sense that he would kind of be the one to want to try that out first. And I can see that in Peter. Let's see how this is going to work. This is pretty cool. Peter was loyal to the Lord all the way to his death. So how did Peter die? What is the... don't remember that. How did Peter die? Was crucified. I think tradition holds that he was crucified upside down because he did not feel that he was honorable enough and that he was worthy enough to be crucified in the same manner that Jesus was. So I think that is how he died.
That speaks to his character, man. That's
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing thing, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm a little confused.
Okay.
For a long time, for some reason, was under the understanding that Peter was being the apostle that spoke to the Jews, and Paul was the apostle that spoke to the Gentiles.
Okay.
Is that not correct?
I had, he definitely spoke to the Jews a lot early on. I think you see that over in Acts chapter 4. You see that he was speaking to the Jews there. And yes, I believe his charge was that he spent a great deal of time talking to the Jews. When he writes, and maybe we're referring more to
Galatians 2:8.
Galatians 2:8.
Galatians 2:8.
Sorry, 7 and 8.
On the contrary,
Go to 7, yeah.
On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, or he walked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised, and worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. So yeah, I think we're seeing there Peter was mainly charged with talking to the circumcised or the Jews at that time. I think what maybe had got referred to here is that I do believe in 1 Peter, he's writing primarily here to the Gentiles. Now I agree, that was not the question I asked. So I agree, I think there was a little confusion there. Peter was entrusted mainly in his life, talking to the Jews, preaching to the Jews, for sure. I think that is right. I do believe 1 Peter is mainly, at this point, people you're talking to. I think you see that in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Is that it?
Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you could not receive mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Correct. So I believe the writings of 1 Peter are primarily geared towards the Gentiles. I believe that is true.
Well, you see in, here in the first verse of 1 Peter, where he addresses the letter to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. That is probably an area of Asia Minor, if I remember.
Asia Minor, Turkey, yep.
Yeah.
Present-day Turkey, for sure.
And the Jews would have been strangers in that area.
Yep.
And that may be what he's referring to here.
From my studies, I definitely see there were both there.
No doubt the Gentiles were converted as well, but.
Correct. I think primarily we saw from our studies that it was more Gentiles than Jews, but there were certainly both, for sure.
When he said the first Gentile convert, Cornelius, was he the first one you recorded? Peter was more involved?
Yeah. So Peter was certainly involved with both.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, he was deep in the weeds and deep in the with both of them. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's a very good point of clarifying that. Date of the book. What do y'all see is the date that this book was written?
I think it says it's around 60, so that must be right.
That is what I had. I certainly had late first century, around 60 AD. I think, there's a little debate about that and some different things, but I think for most part everybody agrees that Peter died somewhere in the 64, 66 range. And so he would have written this shortly before he died. I think it's certainly before John's writings. I think it's certainly before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So I think that is for sure.
Was he in Rome at that time?
I think he was in Rome. Yeah.
He was basically crucified on the same route as Paul was.
Correct. He was definitely in Rome. Yep. And I think that was actually the very next point. So that is where we will pick up in class on Wednesday. And then we will start getting into the first few verses. And look forward to seeing everybody on Wednesday. Thank you all.
What would have been funny if you said, yeah.
See if she survived the first class.
That Jesus wasn't born on Christmas because she asked, and he was like, you know that's not correct, right? In kindergarten, and I was like, you did, and he was like, yeah, Mom, I did.
You already killed it?